Welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm going to do a little intro. I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we're going to get into our topics. Today's session, the dark side of drive, mental health and the entrepreneurial mind. I'm excited for this. I think it's a really kind of interesting topic, and I think something we don't talk enough about. So I'm excited for this. So we're going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and really just kind of the nature of the passion, the grit, the risk-taking, the boldness that entrepreneurs have to really be successful, but talk a little bit about some of the potential downside. What are some of the challenges that entrepreneurs typically have around mental health? We're going to dig into that. We're going to dig into kind of what is the psychology and the nature of entrepreneurship and how to kind of manage it, and what are the things you need to know getting into entrepreneurship, or if you're in entrepreneurship. Talk about things like burnout, anxiety, even some of the deeper mental health struggles, and really kind of unpack both the science and the stories. Our guests here have a unique and interesting background in both of these areas. So I'm excited for this. So let me introduce our guests. First up, we've got Dr. Michael Freeman. He is a psychiatrist, psychologist. He's also a serial entrepreneur himself, and does a lot of research around helping define what the mental health kind of challenges are for entrepreneurs. He spent decades really looking at the intersection of psychology and entrepreneurship, and sheds light on how mental health can both drive and derail business leaders. Michael, welcome to the program. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. And next up, we've got Travis Luther. Travis is a founder himself. He's also an author. He's a speaker, and has experienced firsthand some of the challenges of mental health and the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. And his story, one of resilience, reflection, hard-won insights that speak to the challenges of many business owners that they face a lot, but unfortunately rarely talk about. So hopefully we'll get a chance to really talk about some of those things today. Travis, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for those that don't know me, I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm a strategic coach. I was a founder and CEO myself, have struggled with a lot of the things I think we're going to talk about today. And today I work with a lot of founders and CEOs on growth and strategy and exits. So I come across this, maybe not daily, probably weekly, but this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate you both for joining us today. Let's just start with the first question. I'll let you each kind of give your take on it. Which is like, what do we see in terms of some of the data around mental health and entrepreneurship? Like, what are some of the things that you connect that you think is important for this conversation? Michael, why don't we start with you, and then we'll hear from Travis.
Yeah, thanks for starting with the data question. We can go like very high level and then drill down.
Yeah.
And Travis, before we start, I do want to say thank you for being willing to share your own personal experience, because it's something that's not so easy for everybody to talk about. And I think if you can normalize it and help people understand that this goes with the territory, it's doing a great service. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
High level, something like 38% of entrepreneurs experience mental health issues over the course of their time building and growing businesses.
Yeah.
Those tend to be fall into a couple buckets: anxiety, depression, ADHD, bipolar, addiction, and I also add dyslexia on the list because that's actually quite common and co-occurs with many of these things. Why is that? It's partially what you bring to the party, and it's partially what the party brings to you.
Yeah.
So it turns out that people with pre-existing mental health issues can self-select into entrepreneurship. For example, people with ADHD are more likely to become entrepreneurs, self-employed business owners, than are people who don't have ADHD. Entrepreneurship is also a really good fit for people in the bipolar spectrum. So there's some of this self-selection into it. But then the other part is, what does the party bring to you? And bottom line, as everybody knows, entrepreneurship is very stressful.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurs are subject to a lot of different occupational hazards, precarity, time pressure, competition, insufficient financing, work-life balance, issues with go-to-market, issues with, recruiting and maintaining a team, all this stuff. And so that can create some like stress-related mental health issues as well.
Yeah.
Anxiety, depression, for example, being the case.
Yeah.
So I think high level, that's the picture.
Yeah.
Data perspective. On
Sure.
long-term studies, in like very large long-term studies, it has been shown that people who are self-employed are more likely to have a mental health issue than people who are employees. And it's also been shown that receiving a mental health diagnosis of some kind predicts that people will make the choice to become self-employed. So there's definitely a big overlap going on here.
That's fat. Travis, before we get to you, I just wanted to ask, I guess, what's the baseline? Like, we talked about 30% of entrepreneurs have some of this. I mean, is the general population 37%? Is the general population 0? Like, I guess
it's a little higher than baseline.
Yeah.
Like I said, in these big studies, the entrepreneurs are more likely than employed people.
Yeah.
So that would be the comparison, employed people. One of our big studies, we compared entrepreneurs with managers. So it's a little bit higher. Suicidality is definitely higher. We have 1.7% of entrepreneurs had a history of psychiatric hospitalization. 3% had a history of having made suicide attempts. So it's a real thing.
Yeah.
And it's something you want to really pay attention to.
Yeah.
But also, the kinds of mental health issues that entrepreneurs experience can be a little different from the kinds that employed people might experience, with higher levels of ADHD, with higher levels of bipolar spectrum, for example.
Yeah.
So that's how I would frame that.
Yeah. Travis, I know that you've done a fair amount of work in this space. Obviously, you have a personal story, which I want to get into, but also you've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, leaders in various capacities, both on a formal and informal basis. I know we know each other through EO, and so we have lots of connections kind of in the space. I guess what's your sense of kind of the prevalence or how frequently this comes up for entrepreneurs in terms of either mid-level or high level of mental health challenges? Like, what for you, like what do you feel is the prevalence of this in the population?
Yeah, just by way of background, my story is that, professionally, I was an entrepreneur, have been an entrepreneur for, 25 years now. But I also have this academic career too, where I went to graduate school in sociology. And that combination of things really helped me at the point where I developed probably my rock bottom point in my life for some of my most significant mental health struggles. And that was when I accidentally stumbled upon my opioid addiction as a consequence of a back injury I had. I battled that for 6 years, and I battled that within my entrepreneurial community as like a big secret that I didn't want to tell anybody about, as a big weakness. And as I worked through, ending that addiction and coming into my recovery, I left that with the question, how the hell could this happen to me? Because this isn't something that happened to me as a young man, starting my life. It happened to me as I was a mature entrepreneur who, knowingly came from a family with addiction problems, came from teen parents. I had a lot of trauma in my background, but my addiction started at the point where I thought I had beat all that.
Yeah.
And so again, my question is, if this could happen to me, somebody who seemingly got everything they wanted out of entrepreneurship, how often is this also happening in my community? And so it was my attempt to answer that question that led me into, this place of starting to speak publicly about my addiction and some of the reasons or conclusions I've come to as to why that has happened. And in the course of, speaking to people, workshopping, doing trauma based workshops and stuff, my experience is that 3 out of 4 entrepreneurs will raise their hand when I ask them, how many of you have experienced some kind of chronic trauma in your childhood, in your background. And so, Dr. Freeman can clarify on his, 35 or 37%, whether that's people who are actively experiencing a mental health issue now. But in my experience, like I said, about 75% or 3 out of 4 have had something that they would describe as trauma. So that can be, that can be bullying, that can be feelings of abandonment, addiction, homelessness, poverty, all sorts of things come under that traumatic umbrella. But as Freeman kind of alluded to, in my own experience, was some of the reasons that entrepreneurs or trauma is so prevalent in entrepreneurs is because entrepreneurs often are looking for a place where they have control as a consequence of really living in chaotic environments. And I know that was the case for me. I was attracted to entrepreneurship because I felt like, okay, here's the place where I get to dictate the terms of my life. Yeah, sure, it's scary to some people, but I've lived through scary things. What was really important to me was to feel like I was in charge. And so that, I think, is the other reason that I see, about 75% of entrepreneurs having suffered some kind of trauma is because they are also looking for a place where they feel like they can get some control.
Yeah, no, I certainly personally resonate with that one. Right, like it is, and I don't. I guess maybe this is my next question: is how much do you feel like people consciously know this or know this at some level, and they choose entrepreneurship because it gives them this control, or it gives them a lifestyle or a context what they feel fundamentally more capable of operating within, versus how much of this is they can't function in other, in other situations, and like entrepreneurship becomes like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be an entrepreneur because I can't function very well in these other areas.
No, it's really both. And to your point, Travis, there have been several studies about the adolescence of entrepreneurs, and what those studies all conclude is that the adolescent who goes on to become an entrepreneur is significantly more likely to have run-ins with the criminal justice system than would otherwise be the case. Yeah. Even Bill Gates, if you want to look it up, has a criminal record, and you can see his mugshot on the internet from, I think, stealing a car or something when he was in high school, or maybe it wasn't. I don't remember all the details, but these are, rule breakers and troublemakers and disruptors, and that's baked in the cake. It just turns out, if you're disruptive, like adolescent, that's looked on as a negative thing. If you're a disruptive entrepreneur, that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Go out and,
finally, you get rewarded for these behavioral tendencies that we have.
Yeah. But it's hardwired to a certain extent.
Yeah. I might also add, from a sociological perspective, we look at social stratification in terms of income, and a lot of what we see in entrepreneurship are people who are lower income and also enter entrepreneurship, much like me, because they don't have like a lot of other options, right? So we're not people whose parents put college funds together for us or talk to us about college or anything like that. You'll find a lot of high school dropouts, myself included, tons of college dropouts. There's no shortage of college dropouts. And so it also becomes maybe at some point the only other way to make money if you're not on a traditional 9-to-5 college career path.
But even though a bunch of entrepreneurs may not be as highly educated, it doesn't mean they're not smart. In fact, entrepreneurs have above average levels of intellect, and they often end up being like the B students that hire the A students.
Tell me more.
Well, our joke in architecture was the A students would go on to teach, and the B students would work for the C students. Because the C students were smart enough to figure out, I only need to do this amount of stuff, this amount of work to pass, and then I'm going to start a company. I'm going to make the money.
So, as a psychiatrist, all of my clients are entrepreneurs, and this one guy who did very well told me that in school they used to call him Mr. 80%. He would never get higher than 80% on anything.
Yeah.
Even though he's like way smarter than most of the kids in his class.
But why?
So let me just say one thing about the addiction too, because it's a good issue to talk about, because there are substance addictions, but there are also behavioral addictions. So behavioral addiction is like internet gaming or gambling, things like that. shopping addictions you've heard of.
Yep.
Well, it turns out that for some people, entrepreneurship itself can become a behavioral addiction. There's like work addiction.
Yeah.
And there are people who just can't stop themselves from starting more companies. They go and become serial entrepreneurs. And so while I think the incidence of substance use kinds of issues among entrepreneurs might even be lower than the baseline population a little bit.
Okay.
The behavioral addictions can be a real thing. Entrepreneurship, at the end of the day, is a form of gambling.
Yeah.
You're highly concentrated risk. You're betting it all on one strategy. Mm-hmm. And the most likely outcome is that you're going to lose. So I think we want to keep the behavioral side and the substance side in mind at the same time.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Travis.
I was just going to say, I could talk a little bit about, my the evolution of my substance abuse problem really came from this improper assignment of what entrepreneurship was going to do for me, right? So there was this kind of, in addition to the financial part and the freedom part and the lack of other opportunities part, there was also this belief that if I could be successful enough in entrepreneurship, that success and the money that would come with it would also allow me to, fix the problems in my family, bring my family back together, take care of people in my family who were struggling and hadn't had the success that I had. And I think it was this kind of perfect storm of this realization that I was using entrepreneurship like anyone else uses a drug. I was using it to cover and mask a lot of the sadness, hurt, and disappointment in my life. It was that point that I realized, oh man, this isn't going to solve my problems like I thought it was, and then that kind of coinciding with my back injury and the prescription pills and how the prescription pills really just did a wonderful job of numbing all of that and making all that noise and pain go away. It wasn't that I just simply started doing drugs because I couldn't deal with my problems. It's because I thought entrepreneurship was going to solve my problems. And at the point I realized it wasn't, the door was left open for something else that would. And in my case, that ended up being opioids.
Yeah.
And one other issue, which was that you had a risk factor. Mm-hmm. And the risk factor is family history of addiction. Mm-hmm. So people with a family history of addiction, whether or not you're an entrepreneur, are just more at risk for getting hooked on, addictive substances. And so, Travis, I think in your case, it was like the perfect storm of all of those.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's the balance, I guess? I'm not sure how to ask the question. It's like, on one hand, yes, these can be extremely destructive for individuals, for their families, for the communities, right? Like these present problems that are severe and significant and cause a lot of harm. On the flip side, it's like, okay, but some of this stuff is what makes us good entrepreneurs. So how do you kind of, I guess, measure or balance or draw some lines that we can use as guardrails as entrepreneurs to say, okay, well, this behavior is acceptable and good and is going to allow you to be a good entrepreneur, but if you get too far to the left, you're now we're in a red zone of this might come back to be something that does more harm than good. Like, can you do that? I guess what's the guidance on this?
For me, guidance is two things. One is basic well-being strategies. I'll get to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. And the other is taking an inventory of the superpowers and the vulnerabilities. Because with all of these mental health conditions, they're there because there's something good about it. Otherwise, if there wasn't anything good about any mental health conditions, it would not have been conserved through evolution. But let's say anxiety, for example. What's good about anxiety is that it's associated with harm avoidance, risk aversion, prudence, caution. And as an entrepreneur, you have to decide which risks to take and which risks to not take.
Yeah.
And so people that are a little bit tilted towards anxiety might sleep on it for a night, might ask a couple opinions from other experts, might do a more cautious approach to risk-benefit analysis before they, put it all on black. The downside, the vulnerability, is analysis paralysis and imagining things are more risky than they really are. Having catastrophic thinking, what if thinking about a situation, and not moving forward when you really should, because you can never have all the information. So whatever your mental health profile, it's associated with superpowers and vulnerabilities. And if you can learn how to play the strong cards, manage the risk factors, I think you're in a good place. Other side of the coin, the wellness practice, get sleep.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks if you just work harder and work longer, you're going to get more done and do more faster and all this. And reality is you don't. The quality of your work deteriorates as you push past, your burnout point. And your functioning deteriorates, and you increase the likelihood of other mental health issues popping up. Take breaks, go outside, stay physically fit, stay close to the friends and family that have nothing to do with work. Maintain your overall well-being while you're on that journey.
Yeah. I'm curious, Travis, what have you found as being kind of your ability, or what heuristics you use to kind of monitor yourself and am I going too far down a certain path, or how do you balance some of these things?
Yeah, I think, when I'm doing workshops or speaking, what I'm asking entrepreneurs to do, and wish I would have done more, is to understand, do you know why you're doing what you're doing, right? Do you know what your real motivations are? Are you really, are you really living your mission in your business, or has your business become a mask to some other thing you're trying to avoid, right? And so, that was the thing for me, is that, though I might state a perfectly obvious and good, entrepreneurial business mission, the mission down in my heart, like I said, was to try and fix and heal my wounds and try to bring my family back together. And so you can see where the measures of success are really kind of the measures of some kind of, mental health problem, right? Where you have an entrepreneur who has 30 Rolex watches and 4 Ferraris, and is just always adding status and stature, and trying to say, oh, look, what I've done. And really inside they're dying, and they're doing that because they're not getting that recognition or those feelings of fulfillment that they thought were going to come from success. And too often we applaud those things, right? We applaud the entrepreneur with 10 Rolexes, 2 Ferraris, and 20 girlfriends, and we say, "Oh man, look how well you're doing." When really we need to say, "Hey, those things are great, right?" Although I wouldn't want to try and balance 20 girlfriends, but I'd certainly get a Ferrari. But those things are not. Those things are great so long as they are what comes above and beyond, your mental well-being. When those things just are new items to mask your pain, you're actually really getting worse rather than getting better. Even though you're being applauded as doing such a good job, you're really setting yourself up for kind of that fulcrum event that I had, where all of a sudden, I realized deep down inside I had nothing at all.
Yeah. I use a phrase a lot. When I'm working particularly with CEOs, I ask them, how well do they know their elephant? And the thinking or the model is that, behavior is, we're on top of an elephant driving, the human on the elephant is the, executive function, but the elephant is our subconscious, right? And the fact is the elephant really decides most of our behavior. Yeah. It's just, we oftentimes think we're in control. We feel like, oh yeah, we have complete control thing. In fact, the elephant is really most in control, but you have to know your elephant. You have to know, okay, my elephant really likes tall grass, right? So if I go near tall grass, we're probably going to end up in the tall grass, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. So we probably shouldn't go near some tall grass, right? So it's how well do they know their subconscious, unconscious behavioral patterns? And while you can't, you can try to change them, and we can talk about ways of doing that, but generally it's be aware of them. At least you can make some decisions that you can try to avoid some of the likely downfalls if you have some general understanding around that. The other one I'm curious about is how well kind of your immediate context, the people that you're working with And then you mentioned peer groups. I think, Michael, a little bit in terms of, having your social connections outside of work and stuff. I will say personally, it wasn't until I joined EO, this was like 2005, 2006, something like that, joined EO, and I had a CEO group that I started working with. It was like, it didn't even hit me that I could talk about some of this stuff, right? Like even my, maybe my mother's a psychoanalyst, so maybe I could talk to her about some things, but like, my dad, I wasn't like my brother, like even, my family, I certainly didn't want to talk to my wife at the time about it, right? Like that would freak her out, right? So like having this group or having some kind of space, some kind of social context where you can actually discuss these things in a safe way, and right, like how important from a kind of research point of view is it? And then I'm curious, Travis, to hear some of your story about when, like how these groups, how this social connections helped with some of this stuff, both personally and from a professional point of view. So, Michael, what's you mentioned it earlier. Give me your take on this.
I know, I certainly will. But first, I just want to remember that about a third of entrepreneurs are women. So
yes,
for all of the women entrepreneurs who are watching this with the 20 boyfriends, all
or
of
girlfriends.
or girlfriends, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, exactly.
So the same recommendations apply to you. It's pretty much the same program, with some differences, which is that on average women are more comfortable asking for help than men. But your point, though, Bruce, is very well taken, that there really is nothing like peer support. And so I would advocate for anybody who's an entrepreneur to get into some kind of peer support group. And most of the big networks like EO or like YPO, or maybe you're an alumni of Y Combinator, or there's Startup Grind, or there are a bunch of big entrepreneur. GEN is another one. They all offer peer networks, and that emotional support is very important. Entrepreneurs often experience loneliness, which is odd because as an entrepreneur, you are interacting with people all day long. Customers, suppliers, bankers, accountants, consultants, team members, all across the board, channel partners. And yet it feels very lonely. And that's because you are the decision maker, and no matter how much input you get, the choice you make is yours. The consequences are on you. So that peer support. And then the other thing about, Bruce, whether or not you want to open up about this stuff with your wife, I would say, give it a shot.
She's no longer my wife at this point, but yes, I think I've learned, one of the things I've learned later in life is that you have to have these conversations.
Yeah, you want to be able to really have intimate partnership with somebody. And again, back to the Ferraris and the Rolexes, self-worth and net worth should not be the same thing. If you're going to start a company, odds are it will fail. So your self-esteem shouldn't be totally contingent upon that. You just got to remember, only 1% of people can be in the top 1%. Yeah. So you're doing this because you have a product or service or innovation that you want to introduce to the world, and that is the motivation.
Travis, I'd love to hear some of your stories around this.
I would just, to reflect on what he just said, I would say early on in my entrepreneurial journey, I did learn that, my business failures were not the same as my personal failures. And I think that did take a few years and a few failures. But after I could kind of come out of that, I felt like I could pursue entrepreneurship in a much healthier way, because I just, the odds are stacked against you, right? Especially when you're a newer entrepreneur. So being able to disconnect personal failure and business failure is super important. As far as a peer network goes, I was just facilitating a forum this weekend, and I was talking to the folks about, what we all know, which is like in our world outside of forum or outside of peer groups, we tend to be the person that almost everybody comes to when they have an issue or a problem or need advice. And a lot of times, we take on that hero persona And that becomes part of our identity, as I'm the person who can solve problems for my friends. But then, like Michael said, it's a very lonely place to be. You develop this habit of not wanting to say no, or develop this habit of not wanting to be vulnerable because you're now the leader of your group. And so, when I entered a peer group, when I entered EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, it was almost like entering a foreign country, right? Because it was like suddenly this place where not only was it okay to be vulnerable, but it was almost a requirement to be vulnerable and talk about what's going on, and to talk about not just the things that you excel at, but where are you stumbling? What are your shortcomings, whether it's personally or in your business or in your family? And I often say to new members of groups like that, I'll just be honest, it took me a couple years to really fully let that shell come down and to say, it's okay, Travis, if you are not the hero of everybody's question or problem. It's okay if you can't solve anything. And most importantly, it's okay to say, I don't know, or I can't help you. That was like a super powerful thing to be able to let go of, was this persona that, I was the guy that could fix stuff.
Yeah. I remember one of the more powerful exercises we did in Forum was your anti-resume. Right. And it was just a list of all your failures and all your F ups, and and it was funny because it came almost like a contest. Put the most significant thing on there. But it just changes the energy. Like, once you kind of get out of this trying to posture and trying to convince everyone else how successful you are, and you just get real about, look, I've had to deal with some pretty horrible stuff. A lot of it was my own doing.
The culture of entrepreneurship exerts a lot of pressure to portray yourself as being, crushing it all the time.
Yeah.
And so you kind of really need to go against the grain with that. And in a setting like a forum, for example, where you can keep things confidential and just be more authentic, it really facilitates being able to plug into and have a sense of community, which otherwise it's harder to find.
Yeah. So we're going to hit time here. I want to thank you both tremendously for being part of this conference. We could go on for hours, I think, on this one. There's a couple of threads here. I'd love to pull more at some point. But Travis, if people want to get a hold of you or find out more about what you do, what's the best way to get that information?
Yeah, very easy. Just go to travisluther.com. My website's there. And then a lot of my own work and research I post mostly to my Instagram feed, which is at Travis Scott Luther. I also just want to plug, Michael Freeman. He and I are going to be at the Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit in Boulder, May 28th and 29th. I spoke there last year. He's going to be speaking there on May 29th. So if you guys are in the Denver, Boulder, Colorado area, we would love to see you.
Yeah. And remind me, just put a comment on the LinkedIn page with the link to the information too, so people can get it there. And Dr. Freeman, if people want to get a hold of you, find out more about what you do, what's the best way to get that? I'm
on LinkedIn and also econa.net, econa.net. You can get to me that way as well.
Perfect. Thank you. If people want to get a hold of me, it's bruce@eckfeldt.com is my email, and just eckfeldt.com is my URL. Travis, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks
for making this topic a priority, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Yes. And thank you all for joining us. Again, check the comments. We'll be checking the comments. So if you're watching the replay and want to leave questions there, we'll follow up there. Travis, Michael, thank you again.
Thank you.